My friends, please subscribe to my channel, like the video, and write a comment, and we begin. Part 1. The hallway seat expanded. The satin strapless dress, a shade of blush pink that Olivia had insisted would perfectly complement my skin tone, felt increasingly like a suffocating straitjacket. I tugged at the bodice, the fabric digging into my ribs, and surreptitiously kicked off one of my ridiculously high heels, wincing at the sharp pain that shot up my leg. 3 hours into my sister's meticulously planned, excessively extravagant wedding, and I was already regretting every single life choice that had led me to this moment. It was Olivia's day, of course. And to be fair, she looked stunning. The epitome of bridal perfection in a gown that probably cost more than my entire apartment. She was radiant, glowing with a happiness that I couldn't quite share, even though I desperately wanted to. But beneath the surface of manufactured joy, a simmering resentment bubbled within me, carefully masked behind a pasted-on smile that was beginning to feel like a permanent fixture on my face. The Blackwood Manor was a monument to old money and ostentatious displays of wealth. The sprawling estate, complete with manicured gardens, a shimmering lake, and an army of impeccably dressed staff, screamed privilege. Ice sculptures of swans adorned the entrance, their glistening forms reflecting the twinkling fairy lights strung across the manicured lawns. Inside, a string quartet played classical melodies, their music adding to the overall air of refined elegance. It was the kind of wedding that belonged on the cover of a glossy magazine, not in the real world. And the seating chart? Well, the seating chart had been peculiar. Downright insulting, to be honest. I had arrived at the reception, a sprawling ballroom filled with elegantly dressed guests, located my name card with a growing sense of unease, and discovered that my designated seat was in the hallway. Not at a table, mind you, surrounded by friends and family. Not even at a slightly less desirable table near the restrooms or the kitchen. No, my seat was a lone, solitary chair positioned against a cold, unforgiving wall in the dimly lit hallway outside the main ballroom. The wall was adorned with portraits of long-dead Blackwood ancestors, their stern, judgmental gazes seeming to follow my every move. At first, I genuinely thought it was a mistake. A misplaced card, a clerical error, a cruel joke played by a disgruntled wedding guest. I envisioned the wedding planner, a tightly wound woman with a permanent headset glued to her ear and an air of thinly veiled exasperation, quickly rectifying the situation, ushering me to a proper table with profuse apologies. But when I nervously approached her, clutching my name card like a lifeline, she barely glanced at me, her eyes scanning the room with a laser-like focus. "Ava," she said, her voice clipped and efficient. "Yes, hallway seat. Perfectly correct. It's all on the chart. Enjoy the celebration." Enjoy the celebration? How could I possibly enjoy the celebration when I was being treated like an unwelcome guest at my own sister's wedding? Humiliated, defeated, and feeling like the world's biggest idiot, I sank into the unforgiving wooden chair, my carefully constructed facade of happiness beginning to crumble. The hallway offered a partial, distorted view of the dance floor, a sliver of the meticulously decorated room filled with laughing guests, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of the chandeliers. I could hear snippets of conversation, bursts of laughter, and the rhythmic beat of the DJ's music, but I felt completely isolated, cut off from the celebration, like an exhibit in a museum, forever separated from the vibrant world on the other side of the velvet rope. And then I saw him, the groom, Ethan. He was standing near the dance floor, surrounded by a gaggle of admirers, his handsome face wreathed in a charming smile. He caught my eye, his gaze lingering for a moment longer than necessary. A slow, deliberate smirk spread across his face, a subtle expression that sent a shiver of unease snaking down my spine, chilling me to the bone. Ethan and I had a history. A complicated, messy, and deeply embarrassing history that Olivia knew nothing about. A secret that we had both vowed to keep buried, a memory that haunted my dreams and fueled my insecurities. And that smirk, it wasn't just a smile. It was a power play, a reminder of our shared secret, a subtle threat that made my blood run cold. It was a silent message that said, "I know what you did." And I was terrified of what he might do with that knowledge. Part 2. The whispered secret expanded. The memory of that night with Ethan played out in my mind, an unwanted rerun I couldn't seem to escape. It had been our junior year of college, a hazy, alcohol-fueled evening at a party thrown by our fraternity. I had been nursing a broken heart, fresh from a particularly messy breakup, and Ethan, always the compassionate friend, had offered a listening ear, a shoulder to cry on, and an endless supply of cheap beer. One thing led to another, as it often does in those situations, and the lines between friendship and something more began to blur. We stumbled back to his dorm room, fueled by liquid courage and a desperate need for connection, and made a mistake. A big, messy, regrettable mistake. The details were hazy, fragmented by the alcohol and the years that had passed. But the feeling of shame, of guilt, of having betrayed a trust, remained sharp and vivid. We had crossed a line, violated an unspoken boundary, and irrevocably altered the dynamics of our friendship. The next morning was awkward, filled with mumbled apologies and averted gazes. We swore never to speak of it again, to pretend it never happened, to bury the incident deep within the recesses of our memories, hoping it would simply fade away. We managed to salvage our friendship, but it was never quite the same. The unspoken secret hung between us like a heavy curtain, casting a shadow over our interactions, a constant reminder of our lapse in judgment. Then Olivia came along. She was a freshman, bright-eyed and full of naive optimism. She was instantly smitten with Ethan, captivated by his charm and his effortless charisma. He, in turn, seemed equally enamored with her, drawn to her youthful innocence and her unwavering admiration. I watched their relationship blossom with a mixture of envy and dread, my stomach churning with a complex cocktail of emotions. I was happy for Olivia, of course. She deserved to find love, to experience the joy and fulfillment of a committed relationship. But I couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into a trap, that she was being blinded by Ethan's charm, unaware of the darkness that lurked beneath the surface. I tried to warn her, to drop subtle hints about Ethan's past, about his tendencies. I cautioned her to be careful, to take things slow, to really get to know him before making any rash decisions. But she wouldn't listen. She was too blinded by love, too convinced that she had found her Prince Charming, to heed my warnings. "You're just jealous, Ava," she had said, her voice laced with a hint of annoyance. "You're just trying to sabotage my happiness because you're still hung up on Liam." I knew it was futile. I couldn't force her to see what I saw, to understand the complexities of my relationship with Ethan. She had to learn the hard way, to discover the truth for herself. And now, here I was, relegated to the hallway at their lavish wedding, while Ethan, the man who knew my deepest secret, stood at the center of it all, basking in the adoration of my sister and their assembled guests. The injustice of it all was almost unbearable. Later in the evening, as I nursed my lukewarm champagne, trying to avoid eye contact with the Blackwood ancestors staring down at me from the wall, Olivia approached me, her face flushed with happiness, her eyes sparkling with wedding day bliss. "Having fun, Ava?" she asked, her voice a little too loud, her smile a little too wide. "It's lovely, Olivia," I replied, forcing a smile that felt more like a grimace. "Everything looks beautiful. You look beautiful." "I'm so glad you could make it," she said, but her eyes didn't quite meet mine. There was a coolness in her gaze, a distance that hadn't been there before. As she turned to leave, she leaned in close, her voice dropping to a bare whisper that sent a chill down my spine. "Ethan told me about you too," she said, her eyes hardening, her smile vanishing completely. "Don't think I don't know what happened between you in college." Then she walked away, leaving me reeling, my heart pounding in my chest, my mind racing with questions. Ethan had told her? Why? What had he told her? Had he revealed the full extent of our indiscretion? Had he twisted the story to make himself look like the victim? And what did Olivia plan to do with this information? Was she going to confront me, to publicly shame me, to ruin my life? The hallway, already a place of humiliation and isolation, suddenly felt like a prison, trapping me with my secrets and my fears. Part 3. The missing bracelet expanded. The hallway, despite my attempts to ignore it, remained surprisingly active. A constant stream of guests passed by, their laughter and chatter a jarring contrast to the turmoil churning within me. Some were headed to the restrooms, their faces etched with the familiar grimace of too much champagne. Others were seeking refuge on the outdoor patio, drawn to the promise of fresh air and a momentary escape from the wedding festivities. Most of them barely glanced at me, lost in their own conversations and their own wedding-induced bliss, oblivious to my solitary confinement and my growing sense of dread. But one woman stopped, her face etched with genuine concern, her eyes filled with a warmth that cut through the cold detachment of the Blackwood Manor. It was Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, a kind and perceptive woman who had always been a source of support and comfort. She was the only member of my family, besides my grandmother, who had consistently treated me with kindness and understanding, who had never judged me for my life choices or pressured me to conform to their expectations. "Ava, darling," she said, her voice a soothing balm to my frayed nerves. "Are you all right? You look uncomfortable, like you'd rather be anywhere else in the world." I sighed, my carefully constructed facade finally cracking under the weight of my accumulated anxieties. "I'm fine, Aunt Carol," I lied, knowing she wouldn't believe me for a second. She raised a skeptical eyebrow, her eyes searching my face for the truth. "Don't give me that, Ava. I know you better than that. What's going on?" Reluctantly, I confided in her, pouring out my heart in hushed tones, careful not to attract the attention of any prying ears. I told her about my seating arrangement, about Olivia's whispered warning, about the simmering tension between me and Ethan, about the gnawing feeling that something was terribly wrong. Aunt Carol listened patiently, her brow furrowed with concern, her hand resting reassuringly on my arm. She didn't interrupt, she didn't judge. She simply offered a listening ear and a compassionate presence. When I finished, she squeezed my arm gently inside. "Something isn't right here, Ava," she said, her voice low and serious. "I can feel it. There's something off about this whole wedding. Something more than just your sister's usual drama." Then, her eyes widened in sudden realization, her hand flying to her neck in alarm. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice trembling. "My bracelet. It's gone." Aunt Carol was wearing a delicate diamond bracelet, a family heirloom that had been passed down for generations. It was a stunning piece, crafted from platinum and studded with dozens of sparkling diamonds. She had been showing it off earlier in the evening, probably telling anyone who would listen about its history and its value, about how it had been passed down from her grandmother to her mother and then to her. "I had it on just a few minutes ago," she said, her voice frantic, her hands fluttering around her wrist, patting it anxiously. "I was admiring it in the restroom mirror. I must have taken it off to wash my hands and forgotten to put it back on." We sprang into action, retracing Aunt Carol's steps, searching the restrooms, the hallways, the outdoor patio. We questioned the wedding staff, interrogated the guests, but the bracelet was nowhere to be found. The elegant Blackwood Manor, with its air of refined sophistication, had suddenly transformed into a crime scene. As the minutes ticked by and the search proved fruitless, a sense of unease settled over me, deepening the anxiety that had already been plaguing me all evening. This wasn't just a case of a misplaced bracelet. Something sinister was happening at Olivia's wedding, something that went beyond petty theft and sibling rivalry. A dark cloud had descended over the celebration, casting a shadow over the champagne flutes and the perfectly arranged floral centerpieces. And I had a feeling that the missing bracelet was just the tip of the iceberg. Part 4. The security footage expanded. Aunt Carol, understandably distraught and increasingly agitated, insisted on reporting the missing bracelet to the wedding planner. The tightly wound woman, whose name I vaguely recalled was Brenda, was clearly annoyed by the disruption, her expression conveying a thinly veiled disdain for the situation. "We can't just accuse someone of theft," Brenda huffed, adjusting her headset with a practiced flick of her wrist. "We need proof. And frankly, I doubt anyone at this wedding would stoop to such a thing. These are very respectable people." Aunt Carol, however, was not to be deterred. She argued persuasively, citing the value of the bracelet, its sentimental significance, and the unsettling atmosphere that had permeated the wedding. Finally, after much persuasion and a veiled threat to involve the police, Brenda reluctantly agreed to review the security footage. We gathered in a small windowless office tucked away behind the ballroom, huddled around a flickering monitor, watching grainy, black and white footage of the reception. The office was cramped and stuffy, filled with the stale scent of stale coffee and unfulfilled potential. Brenda, perched on a rolling chair, fast-forwarded through hours of tedious footage, her brow furrowed in concentration. After what felt like an eternity of reviewing blurry images of dancing guests and overflowing buffet tables, we finally found the clip we were looking for. It showed Aunt Carol entering the ladies' restroom, her diamond bracelet sparkling on her wrist. A few minutes later, she emerged, her face slightly flushed, her hands empty. Then, a figure entered the restroom, their face partially obscured by a deep shadow cast by the overhead lighting. They approached the sink, glanced around furtively, their movements quick and furtive, and then reached for the bracelet, which was lying unattended on the counter. The figure hesitated for a moment, their hand hovering over the glittering jewelry, as if wrestling with their conscience. But temptation ultimately prevailed. The figure slipped the bracelet into their pocket and quickly exited the restroom, disappearing into the throng of wedding guests. The footage was too grainy, too poorly lit, to clearly identify the culprit. The figure was tall and slender, wearing a dark suit. The details were indistinct, the features blurred, but the overall impression was unmistakable. A dark suit, like the one Ethan was wearing. Aunt Carol gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, her face a mask of disbelief and horror. "It can't be," she whispered, her voice trembling, her eyes wide with shock. "It just can't be. He's marrying my niece. He's a Blackwood now." Doubt gnawed at me, an insidious whisper questioning my own judgment, my own perception of reality. Could Ethan really be capable of such a thing? He had always been charming, charismatic, and undeniably attractive. But there had also always been a darkness within him, a hidden layer of complexity that I had never fully understood. He was a master of disguise, capable of projecting an image of innocence and sophistication while concealing his true nature. Was he truly a con artist, a sociopath, capable of manipulating and deceiving those closest to him? Or was I simply projecting my own insecurities and my own resentments onto him, unfairly judging him based on our shared past and my lingering feelings of guilt and betrayal? I wanted to believe that Ethan was innocent, that the security footage was misleading, that there was some other explanation for the missing bracelet. But deep down, a nagging voice told me that I was wrong, that the evidence was undeniable, that Ethan was not the man everyone believed him to be. He was a thief, a liar, and perhaps something even more sinister. The thought chilled me to the bone, making me question everything I thought I knew about my sister, about my family, and about the world around me. The wedding, already tainted by secrets and resentment, had suddenly become a terrifying and unpredictable game, and I had a feeling that the stakes were about to get much higher. Part 5, The Hallway Confession, expanded and concluded. Armed with the damning security footage, Aunt Carol and I, our faces grim with determination, sought out Olivia. Finding her proved surprisingly difficult. She wasn't on the dance floor, she wasn't mingling with the guests, and she wasn't in the ladies' restroom, reapplying her lipstick and perfecting her bridal glow. After a frantic search, we finally found her huddled in a darkened corner of the outdoor patio, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the moon, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She looked lost, vulnerable, and utterly heartbroken. Aunt Carol and I approached her cautiously, our footsteps echoing across the deserted patio. "Olivia," Aunt Carol said gently, her voice laced with compassion, "we need to talk. It's about Ethan." Olivia looked up, her eyes red and swollen, her makeup smeared across her cheeks. "I don't want to talk about Ethan," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I just want to go home. I want this whole day to be over." "I know this is difficult, darling," Aunt Carol said, "but you need to see this. It's important. It's about the bracelet." We led Olivia back inside the Blackwood Manor, to the same cramped, stale-smelling office where we had reviewed the security footage. As she watched the grainy images play out on the monitor, her face gradually transformed from confusion to shock to disbelief to utter devastation. She initially dismissed the footage as a mistake, a misidentification, a cruel prank. She refused to believe that her beloved Ethan, the man she had vowed to spend the rest of her life with, could be capable of such a thing. She made excuses for him, claiming that the figure in the dark suit must have been someone else, that the security footage was somehow doctored, that we were all jumping to conclusions. But when we pointed out the telltale gait, the distinctive mannerisms, the subtle details that made it undeniably Ethan, her resistance finally crumbled. The dam of denial broke, and a torrent of tears streamed down her face, her body shaking with uncontrollable sobs. "No," she cried, her voice a heartbroken wail. "It can't be true. He wouldn't do that to me. He loves me." "I'm so sorry, Olivia," Aunt Carol said, her voice filled with genuine sorrow. "But the evidence is undeniable. You need to confront him. You need to know the truth." Driven by a mixture of anger, betrayal, and a desperate need for answers, Olivia, her face a mask of anguish, ran to find Ethan. Aunt Carol and I followed close behind, our hearts pounding in our chests, our senses heightened with a mixture of anticipation and dread. We found Ethan in the hallway, pacing nervously back and forth, his face pale, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. He looked guilty, anxious, and utterly terrified. Olivia confronted him, her voice trembling with rage and betrayal. "Did you steal Aunt Carol's bracelet?" she demanded, her eyes blazing with fury. Ethan initially denied it, feigning innocence, feigning surprise. He tried to gaslight her, to manipulate her, to convince her that she was imagining things, that we were all conspiring against him. But Olivia, emboldened by our support and armed with the damning security footage, refused to back down. "Don't lie to me, Ethan," she screamed, her voice growing louder, attracting the attention of nearby guests, their conversations abruptly ceasing, their faces turning towards us with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "I saw the video. I know it was you. Just tell me the truth." Finally, his facade cracked, his carefully constructed image of charming innocence shattered into a million irreparable pieces. He slumped against the wall, his shoulders slumping in defeat, his eyes filled with a mixture of shame and desperation. "Fine. Yes, I took it," he confessed, his voice laced with desperation, his gaze shifting nervously from Olivia to me to Aunt Carol. "I needed the money. I'm in debt. I borrowed from the wrong people, and they're threatening me. I didn't know what else to do." Olivia gasped, her face contorted with pain, her voice cracking with disbelief. "You lied to me," she cried, her eyes filled with a heartbreak that mirrored my own. "Our whole relationship has been a lie. You don't love me. You just wanted my money." Ethan reached out to her, his hand outstretched, his voice pleading. "Olivia, please," he begged. "I can explain. It's not like that. I do love you. I just made a mistake." But Olivia recoiled in disgust, her face contorted with loathing. "Stay away from me," she screamed, her voice echoing through the silent hallway. "I never want to see you again." Then, his gaze, desperate and calculating, landed on me. A familiar smirk, cold and menacing, spread across his face, sending a chill snaking down my spine. "You thought you could get away with it, didn't you, Ava?" he said, his voice dripping with venom, his eyes filled with a malicious glee. "You thought you could expose me, ruin my life. You thought you could finally have your revenge." "Revenge?" Olivia asked, her brow furrowing in confusion, her gaze shifting from Ethan to me. "What are you talking about? What's going on?" Ethan smirked, a predatory gleam in his eyes. "Ava and we have a history," he said, his voice dripping with insinuation, his eyes fixed on me, daring me to deny it. "A secret we've been keeping for years. A secret that would destroy her life if it ever got out. A secret that would make you see her for what she really is." My heart pounded in my chest, my breath caught in my throat. He was bluffing, I told myself. He wouldn't dare reveal our secret, not in front of Olivia, not in front of Aunt Carol, not in front of all these witnesses. He wouldn't risk exposing himself even further, not when he was already teetering on the edge of ruin. But I knew Ethan. I knew his capacity for cruelty, his willingness to do whatever it took to protect himself, even if it meant sacrificing others in the process. He was unpredictable, volatile, and utterly ruthless. And I had no doubt that he would use our secret, our past indiscretion, to hurt me, to destroy me, to tear my life apart. He opened his mouth, ready to unleash the truth, to expose the shame and guilt that had haunted me for years. But before he could speak, before he could utter the words that would irrevocably alter my life and my relationship with my sister, Aunt Carol stepped forward, her voice ringing with an unexpected authority, her eyes blazing with a fierce protectiveness. "Enough, Ethan," she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "I know everything. You don't need to say another word." Ethan scoffed, his smirk faltering, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. "What do you know, Carol? What could you possibly know about any of this?" Aunt Carol smiled, a slow, knowing smile that sent a chill down my spine. "I know about the DNA test, Ethan," she said, her voice calm and steady. "The one Olivia's father made you take before you married her. The one that revealed you were actually more closely related to the bride than a groom should be." Ethan's face drained of color, his body trembling with a mixture of shock and fear. Olivia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. "What are you talking about, Aunt Carol?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "What does that mean?" "It means," Aunt Carol said, her gaze fixed on Ethan, her voice devoid of all emotion, "that Ethan is your half-brother, Olivia. Years ago, before she married your father, your mother had an affair. Ethan is the product of that affair, a secret that she kept hidden for years, a truth that your father only discovered a few weeks before the wedding. The threat to reveal it was the reason I was asked to fake a kidnapping, to take his place at the wedding." The hallway fell silent, the wedding festivities grinding to a halt. Olivia stood frozen, her